This episode of Behind These Walls highlights Fort Boykin, an earthen fortification on the southern edge of Burrell Bay. Newport News is located directly across the James River, and further northwest are the cities of Williamsburg and Richmond. Today, the fort is an 18-acre park owned and operated by Isle of Wight County. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, a paramount chief known by the English as Chief Powhatan organized 30 tributary peoples into a powerful chiefdom spanning much of eastern Virginia. At the time of English settlement at Jamestown, this collection of tribes inhabited the area. Along this portion of the James River shoreline were 3 villages of the Warsquoyak, with this specific area used primarily as hunting and fishing grounds. In 1608, Captain John Smith went in search of food for his fellow colonists. The Warsquoyak proved friendly, providing 30 bushels of corn for the famished settlers. However, as the Virginia colony grew and encroached upon Indian lands, peaceful relations grew increasingly fragile. On March 22, 1622, an Indian attack on the Virginia colony claimed the lives of hundreds of colonists, including 52 settlers of this county. Following the event, colonists were instructed by the House of Burgesses to construct a protected fort to serve as a lookout for future attacks. The fort, a triangular-shaped earthen structure, took approximately 6 months to construct and was originally christened the Castle due to its deep natural ditches, high elevation, and steep embankment fronting the James River.
You can see all these earthen walls here, dug by hand labor. They would put up logs first and fill in. This would have been covered by trees when they first got here. All of those trees would have been used as part of the fortification.
Ultimately, the Warsquoyak were driven from their land as reprisals for the 1622 incident. By 1646, what was the Powhatan paramount chieftain had been largely destroyed. No action was ever seen at the castle, and ultimately the fort was abandoned until 1677, when, according to the journal of the ship Young Prince, it was active during Bacon's Rebellion. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, growth and expansion of the colony surged along the James River. As the Revolutionary War erupted in 1775, the decision was made to refortify the castle. A good portion of the fort had eroded away.
The front-facing rampart wall is missing. You can see right here, it just sort of drops off.
However, the local militia expanded the nucleus of the fort westward to double its previous size. It was renamed Fort Boykin for Major Francis Boykin, an Isle of Wight local serving on General George Washington's staff. No Revolutionary War engagements took place at the revitalized fort. During the War of 1812, the cities and shores along the rivers of Virginia became vulnerable, making a coastal defense system a necessity. Fort Boykin was enlarged into an irregular 5-pointed star shape, typical of the time period, to protect the James River from British gunboats. An attempt was made by the British to land near Fort Boykin. Local militia foiled the attempt, but for several months, the British man-of-war HMS Plantagenet threateningly anchored near the fort. The final refortification occurred in 1861, when Confederate State Engineer Andrew Talcott was tasked with surveying and designing defenses along the James River to protect the Confederate capital of Richmond, located 55 miles upriver from Union naval assaults. Fort Boykin was designated suitable for gun batteries, much like other nearby fortifications along the James River, including Fort Huger, Mulberry Island, Jamestown, and Drury's Bluff. Between June 1861 and May 1862, the Confederate Army worked at the fort under Captain T.M.R. Talcott and Lieutenant W.G. Turpin. Also under their command were enslaved and free blacks who were described as a force of at least 1,000 hands.
They were leaded or leased by the Confederacy, not paid of course. The owners were paid, and they did all the heavy work.
Free blacks manned and unloaded boats which brought in many Army stores: lime, bricks, lumber, timber, nails, paper, wagons, and molasses. It was hard labor with wheelbarrows in short supply and limited water due to a contaminated well.
Why do we need a well? Well, the James River is partially brackish at this point, so they had to have a well. Every fort had to have a well for fresh water for the garrison.
On May 4th, Magruder abandoned his defensive line across the Virginia Peninsula. With the land route to Richmond cleared, the Union refocused their attention on the Confederate forts blocking the James River. 4 days later, the USS Galena, USS Port Royal, and USS Aristoke attacked both Fort Huger and Fort Boykin, with the worst of the fire directed at Fort Boykin. The Port Royal and Aristoke fired from the James River Channel, while the Galena moved in closer with raking shots.
The James River Squadron attacked this fort, assaulted it with cannon fire from naval gunships, and the Confederates here would have fired back in response.
Both forts eventually ceased fire as their cannons were not powerful enough to damage the wooden-hulled broadside ironclad Galena or reach to the two ships beyond her. These bombardments convinced the Confederates that the forts were untenable and thus abandoned them. Union Marines landed and occupied Forts Boykin and Huger on May 17th and 18th, but found most of the guns spiked, carriages burned, and structures within the forts destroyed. The reduction of both forts opened the James River for the Union fleet to head to Drury's Bluff, a strong Confederate position just 8 miles southeast of Richmond. Fort Boykin became an example of the South's outmoded defense system against the North's modern naval inventions. It instead became a signaling station to monitor traffic on the James River and send regular dispatches to Petersburg and Richmond. While many forts along the country's coast were refortified during the Spanish-American War, Fort Boykin was not. The fort unexpectedly came under fire shortly after the end of World War I. In 1908, Herbert and Mary Greer purchased the fort and made it their home, planting a plethora of beautiful flowers, shrubbery, a large formal flower garden, and a wildflower garden. In 1918, Mrs. Greer was outside tending to her roses and honeysuckle when 2 shells from a 155mm Coast artillery gun whizzed overhead. She quickly alerted Camp Eustis, now Fort Eustis, located just along the James River. The U.S. Army had been diligent in clearing the river of boats and bathers before conducting military exercise, but had forgotten that shells, like stones, can skip across water when fired at an appropriate angle. The fort's last private owners were 3 sisters, Ella, Elizabeth, and Susan Jordan, who purchased it in 1950. From 1841 to 1849, the property had belonged to their grandparents, Colonel Josiah William Jordan and Frances Mosley Dawley Jordan. The sisters were proud to have it back in the family, taking care of the fort, providing a refuge for several peacocks, and graciously hosting many visitors. The Jordan sisters lived in a single-story, architecturally vernacular home dating to the early part of the 20th century, positioned near the bluff. It remained on the site until 2013, when an electrical fire destroyed it. In 1974, the remaining sister, Elizabeth, donated the fort to the Virginia Department of Parks, but continued to live on site until her death in 1976. It was managed by the Isle of Wight Public Recreational Facilities Authority before it became the property of Isle of Wight County in 1999. Today, Fort Boykin's natural habitat consists of a matrix of mature canopy trees, shrub, brush, open turf areas, and frontage along the James River. A black walnut tree over 200 years old and the second largest in Virginia sits to the side of the fort's Farmer Parade ground. Fort Boykin is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, Virginia Landmarks Register, Virginia Civil War Trails, Captain John Smith's Trail, Chesapeake Bay Gateways Network, the Star-Spangled Banner Geo Trail, and the Cornell E. Bird System. The park is open to visitors March through October from 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. and November through February from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. So plan your visit to Fort Boykin today.